Alright, Algebra 2, this is function machines. Just another word of saying evaluating functions. Okay, so when we look at a function, or, you got to remember that a function is different than an equation. It's a little different. Okay, an equation could be anything like this. This could be an equation. This could be an equation. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a function. Okay, if you notice, we only have one variable here. There's only an x. So an equation is not really a function. A function actually has two different variables that are playing off each other. So in this case, we use f of x instead of, remember, y. So this is the same thing as y, but instead of that, we're using f, and so that's what we call function notation. Okay, when we use y or f of x instead. Okay, so a function can be thought of as a machine that assigns an output to every input. So every time I punch in an input, I put in some number, it's going to assign a particular output every time. Okay. So now the f, that part is just the name of the function. Because that letter could be anything, just about anything. You can put y there if you want. You could put g, you could put t, you could put s, you could put r. It just depends. Now, when we're just talking about just any function that doesn't really mean anything, it's just numbers, and we just kind of have some kind of function, right? It doesn't apply to actually real life situation. We typically just use f, and that's what you'll see most of the time. Now, if I'm actually applying this to real life, then I might actually add in a letter or something that kind of represents that. Okay, so if I'm talking about tiles and how they're increasing or something like that, I might use T. If I'm talking about money and how that's increasing in my bank account, maybe I'll use M. And instead of X, maybe I'll use D for dollars. Okay, so that just depends on what you're talking about. So now the inside of the parentheses here, that's our input. Okay, and it doesn't matter what you put here. I can put f of smiley face. Okay, but whatever I put in there has to also be plugged in here. So if I plug in smiley face here, smiley face also needs to go here. But we don't use smiley face, right? We're just using numbers, right? Or actual values. Okay, now this whole thing itself, okay, f of x, actually stands for the output. Because basically what this means is that when I plug in this input of x, f of x represents what I get out. Okay? And then this last part, this is the actual function. Or as we're saying, it's the actual machine. Okay? So now we're going to use this actual function up here, and we're going to illustrate what f of 2 and f of negative 1 is. So if I use 3x plus 4 as my function, then that means I'm actually going to plug in the input of 2. So now it's going to be 3 times 2 plus 4. And 3 times 2 is 6, plus 4, that would be 10. So your output is 10, but now you want to write it in a particular way. So remember that when I plug in 2, I got 10. So function notation, we write f of 2 in parentheses equals 10. And that's how we want to write our solution. Okay, so now let's do the same thing. So now we're going to do f of negative 1. So now we're going to plug in negative 1 here. Okay, now it's 3 times negative 1, negative 3. Then we're going to add 4. That's going to be 1. But again, we don't want to just write 1. We want to write the actual notation. F of negative 1 is equal to 1. To the next page. Okay, so now it says let f of x equal x squared plus 3. G of x is going to be x plus 1. So again, these are different names for different functions. We're going to use f in this case, and then this function we're going to call g. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to find, if it says f, we're going to use this function. If it says g, we're going to use this function. And so we'll get different outputs each time. So now, for this one, we're going to plug in 3 into the f function, x squared plus 3. So 3 goes here. So 3 squared plus 3. And remember, exponents first. 3 squared, 9, plus 3, 12. Okay, now I'm going to do it with the other function, x plus 1. Okay, so g of x is 1, so just plug in 3 there. So then 3 plus 1 is 4. But again, that's not how we write our answer, because when we talk about, again, that's the title here, function notation, okay, we want to write this as the f of 3 is equal to 12, and then f of, or sorry, not f in this case, this is g, g of 3 is equal to 4. Okay? So I want you guys go ahead and try the next ones. Okay, so I plugged in -2. Got to be careful when you have an exponent here, because it's -2 squared, which is positive 4, not -4, which some of you that might have made that mistake. And then add 3, I get 7. So f of -2 equals 7. Then, here we have 0 plus 1, which is 1. So g of 0 equals 1. Now look, if you notice it, that the input, it's not a value or a number, it's actually just a letter. So that's what you're actually going to plug in. So remember, if I have x here, x goes here. If I have smiley face here, smiley face goes here. If I have y here, now that's what goes there. So now it's y squared plus 3. And then this just becomes w plus 1. And it's basically like that w replaced the x, or this y replaced the x. And that's all you're doing. Okay, so now insert an inequality to make a true statement. So what you're trying to do is first you need to figure out what is f of 2 equal to, what is g of 1 equal to, and which one's bigger, or are they equal? Okay? So f of 2, okay, that's going to be, I'm going to have to plug that in, so that's going to be 2 squared plus 3. And be careful, pay attention to the letter here. If it's f, use the f function. Okay, in this case, x squared plus 3, and in this case, x plus 1. And here it says g, okay, so that means we're going to do plug in 1, so 1 plus 1. So this is 2 squared, 4, plus 3 is 7, and then this is 2. So that means that f of 2 is greater than g of 1. Okay, now you guys go ahead and try this one on your own. G of -1 and f of 1. Plug them in and see which one's bigger, or are they equal? Well, if you notice, this was 0, this was 4, so that's greater. Now you've got this something that looks a little different. So now you have f of g of 2. So bear with me here. So what this means is that f is our main function, right? X squared plus 3. But then g of 2 is what we're actually going, then we're going to actually plug in the function g. So into the f function, f of x, you're going to plug in g. So this is what this looks like. So f of g of 2, you're going to, where the x is, you're going to put the g function, x plus 1. So now I put x plus 1 squared plus 3. So that's f of g of x. Okay, but it's asking us to plug in 2. So now to that x, we're going to plug in 2. So f of g of 2, we put 2 plus 1, and then plus 3. And now we just evaluate. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 squared is 9, plus 12, and plus 3 is 12. Okay, so the first one's 12. Then the second one is g of f of. So that means we're going to take, if we start with that letter, that means that's our main function, x plus 1, g of x. And then f is going to be plugged into the g of x this time. So now, g of f of 0 will be equal to, well, I'm just going to plug in the f of x function into the g. So now it's just that plus 1. So basically I replaced the function, f function, with the x. And now I need to put 0 for x. So 0 squared is 0, plus 3 is 3, plus 1 is 4. So then we know that this is bigger because this was 12 and this was 4. Okay? So now this side, we're going to go over this one, and then I want you to do the rest of these on your own. Okay? So now, what is the value of 5? Well, now, if you notice in our function, that there's 2 x's, so that means you're going to plug it in twice. Okay, so then f of 5 is equal to 5 squared minus 3 times 5. So I had to plug it in twice. 25 minus 15 is equal to 10. So f of 5 is equal to 10. C. Okay, I want you guys to try to figure out this one on your own. Okay, and I want you to see if you can try to figure this one out as well on your own. Okay, pause the video. I will show you the answer, and then we will go over the rest next week. But remember, the input is x plus 1, and here's the function, so that means you're plugging that in here. Okay, it's almost like substitution when you plug it in. Okay, and you've got to figure out which expression is equal to that. All right, compare it with your groups.